Welcome back to another Asphalt Legends video. Today is all about the Mercedes-Benz Silver Lightning, and I'm quite excited because this is a fantastic car and of course a very nostalgic car for those of you that have also played Asphalt 8. So we're going to get into all the details about this car, going over the decision of whether or not you should unlock it, and also the little dilemma that I'm in because I'm also looking at another tantalizing A-class car to unlock. Before we get into all of the details though, I want to point you guys to the description of this video down below where I have a couple of links to my social media channels, including my Instagram if you want to see some cool car photography, and my Discord server where you can join and hang out with the community and chat with me as well. So again, those links are in the description down below, and I think it would be really fun if you guys join that Discord. It's a really nice community. Alright, so let's get straight into the topic, which is the Mercedes-Benz Silver Lightning. Now, for those of you that are unaware, this was one of the most iconic cars from Asphalt 8 Airborne. I believe back then it was an S-Class car, and it was a really cool concept car back in the day. Now, this was part of the anniversary update that just went live, and that also added a couple of other nostalgia bait cars like the Citroen Servolt and my personal favorite, the Zonda Cinque. Now that car, or actually both of those cars, I have unlocked through the Drive Syndicate, and I'm pretty sure everyone can get the Servolt for free. However, it's a little more difficult to get that Cinque, but those aren't in the conversation today because there are two big interesting things about the Mercedes-Benz Silver Lightning. Firstly, we have the Silver Lightning special event going on right now, and I believe for a lot of veteran players, you guys will be pretty happy with how the event is laid out. I was actually quite surprised to see that I own and maxed out a number of cars involved in the event. The only ones that I'm missing are the Aston Martin DB12 and the De Tomaso P72. Besides that, I have a pretty healthy roster of cars going into the event, which means I'm going to get a lot of free blueprints for the Silver Lightning. I think it might be just enough to unlock the car without spending any tokens. So that's a pretty awesome thing. So if you are a veteran, I do recommend checking out that event because you may be surprised at how many free blueprints you can get. The other surprising and interesting thing about this car is the fact that it's the new A-Class King. It sits right above the Mercedes-Benz Vision 111, which is funny, we have two Mercedes at the top of A-Class, and of course it is right next to the De Tomaso P72, beating it out by 2 spots. So those are the two cars I actually want to talk about in today's video, and those are going to be the main head-to-head in terms of decision making, because even though the De Tomaso is one of those required cars for the special event, if you actually go look at the stage for the De Tomaso P72, you can see that if you have all of the stars required, I believe it's a 6-star car, you can actually get the key for the De Tomaso. So instead of this event only revolving around the Silver Lightning and the decision to go for it, there's also now the question of going for the P72. Now, I don't think it's realistic for me to go for both because I don't need both. I only really need one A-Class King, so it does make the decision a little more complicated because I can either go for the De Tomaso P72 or I can continue buying blueprints for the Silver Lightning. Alright, so enough context, let's talk about the actual performance, and what you're seeing on screen now is gameplay of the Silver Lightning at max in the current MP2 season, where you can also try it out for free. Now with that being said, that does mean that I'm also going up against other cars of the similar rank, so obviously you're going to see a bunch of other maxed out Silver Lightnings, but you're also going to see a lot of S-Class cars. Now in those straightaway tracks like Norway and Himalayas, I'm going to do absolutely nothing against those Yeskos, the Hennessy Venoms of the world, that sort of thing. However, when we talk about the more twistier tracks, I think I actually do a pretty good job holding my own, and that's because this car has a very interesting blend of stats, which we're going to go over right now. So in my eyes, the main stat that you want to pay attention to for this car is the top speed. It maxes out at 253 miles per hour hour with Nitro, which is actually relatively high for A-Class. When we talk about A-Class cars, typically they'll max out in the upper 230s. The more recent Kings have maxed out in the 240s. We had that one weird Jaguar that went, I think, over 250 miles an hour. So you can add this to the list of very small amount of cars that go over 250 miles per hour in A-Class. Now, typically with those higher top speed A-Class cars, we see a lot of crippling in the other stats. For example, with the GT by Citroen, that guy's acceleration is, I think, like well under 60 or 70, so it's really bad for multiplayer. However, with the Silver Lightning, none of the stats have a very obvious drop off, except for maybe the Nitro, which is really more average than it is bad. So we've covered the top speed. Moving on to acceleration, it maxes out at just above 83, which is not great, but it's also not bad. You typically want to be in the low 80s at the very minimum, especially when you talk about multiplayer. This obviously isn't competing with those crazy electric cars like the Vandas, where they have well into the higher 80s for acceleration. But again, this isn't a cripple like we see with some other top speed focused A-Class cars. It's just fine, and in fact it's actually not that bad. Handling is actually quite interesting. On paper at 76, that's actually quite good, and it very closely matches that De Tomaso that I've been talking about. Now with the De Tomaso, I always felt that that car had really good handling. Obviously not anything like the Vanda, but nothing like the Vanda, but it was quite good and it felt really decent on those twistier tracks. Not only did it have a high top speed in the corners, but it also felt like it could get pretty darty. However, this car is quite different. You can see that on screen it appears really massive and it feels a little more sluggish compared to a lot of the other A-Class cars, especially compared to the Imola, where that car's main point is the handling. So with this car, the handling on paper looks good, but in game it just doesn't quite feel right. And going back to that larger size I've been talking about, that also affects the physics, at least in my viewpoint. Now when I'm going on to some certain barrel rolls, instead of getting 2 or 3 barrel rolls that I would expect with literally any other car in the game, it feels like a lot of the times I'm getting screwed over and only getting 1 barrel roll and barely getting that roll in the first place. Sometimes I get flopped over onto my back. So it seems like this car's size not only has an effect on the handling, but also in terms of the actual physics in game. Now, I don't know if this is like a placebo thing because it just looks bigger on screen. Frankly, I have no idea if there's actually like a stat or something like that for this car, but I do want to keep that in mind, and you should keep that in mind as well, because it does play a little differently and you have to be a little more careful when you approach those barrel roll ramps. So handling, sure, it's not the best compared to other cars, but again, it's not necessarily a cripple either. Even though it's not as darty in the corners as some of those other cars, it still has a pretty good top speed when you do go into the drifts. So it's not something terrible like some of those lower end A-Class cars, again, where you have to have one of those big cripple stats. Finally, Nitro, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but at 54, it's not horrible, but it's also not amazing. The De Tomaso has 70, so that definitely has the Mercedes beat in that aspect, and a lot of the other high-end A-Class cars have really good nitro efficiency, so that is one of the downsides of this car. Again, it's not a cripple, it's not like a Tryon where it's in 30s in terms of the stat, so it's not just your tank is going to run out instantly. I do feel like you get a pretty good amount of acceleration in Shockwave, and you have a good amount of time in Shockwave as well. Again, compared to some of those other S-Class cars especially, this honestly isn't that bad, but it's definitely the point where Gameloft was trying to balance this car out. One thing I do want to mention about the Nitro is that you can see when I try and get perfect Nitro, the window for opportunity for triggering perfect Nitro seems a little more narrow compared to a lot of the other cars in the game. I'm not sure if this is a bug or it actually does reflect in the stats of this car, but I feel like almost all of the other cars in the game have a much easier time triggering perfect Nitro, where this one I actually had a more difficult time. So again, I'm not sure if that's a stat related thing or just maybe a bug, but that's something you do want to keep in mind. So a lot of times in these car review videos, I talk about the actual performance in game rather than the stats, and this car did feel very good, and you can see that I do get to hold my own compared to a lot of other S-Class cars and the other high-end A-Class cars that I encounter in multiplayer. And I think once I get used to the handling of this car, I could actually unleash this car's potential. However, with the current state of things, it feels like the handling is just a little too wonky for my liking. Again, talking about the way that the car handles barrel rolls is just too too awkward, and I did find myself wrecking more often than not. So at the end of the day, I think I'm a little more tempted to just go for the Silver Lightning because it isn't a key car, which means I don't necessarily need to max it out, and I am going to get quite a few blueprints from this event anyway. But I also want to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section down below. Is there something special about the P72 that I'm not aware of that I should go for that car instead, or should I stick to the Silver Lightning? I definitely want to hear your comments, like I said, and which car are you going for? Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all later.